"Shut your mouth." It didn't come from a protester or a politician. It came from Denzel Washington, calm, precise, and deadly still. He wasn't shouting. He didn't need to. He stared straight into the eyes of a Supreme Court justice. The room held its breath. No one moved. No one dared. The cameras blinked. The microphones crackled. And in that moment, power didn't speak. It listened. Justice wasn't blind anymore. It was wide awake and furious. Washington, D.C. Cold light, colder eyes. The hearing chamber felt less like a room of justice and more like a theater prepped for ritual. Every seat polished, every camera pre-positioned, every microphone wired to shape narratives, not capture truth. On paper, this was just another public session. Judicial oversight and reform in modern America. But those in the room knew better. This wasn't just oversight, it was control. And tonight, someone, was about to break that control open. Denzel Washington walked in through the side door. No red carpet, no flash bulbs, no handlers, no press. Just a man in a charcoal coat, worn leather shoes, and a scuffed brown case that looked like it had been to war. And in a way, it had. He didn't nod, didn't smile. He moved like a man walking into a funeral. Not because someone had died, but because truth had. At the front of the chamber, elevated behind a polished wood desk, sat Justice Amy Coney Barrett, her expression unreadable, sculpted from years of discipline, tradition, and certainty. She adjusted her robe as if it were armor and glanced once, briefly, at Denzel. No words passed between them, not yet. The chairman cleared his throat and began the formalities. Today's hearing will examine judicial accountability and its role in equitable governance. Words rolled off like press releases, safe, sterile, and meaningless. But then Denzel rose from his chair. No one introduced him. He didn't wait for permission. He just stood, and when he did, the air changed. He opened his case, slow and precise. Inside, not notes, not cue cards, but a stack of letters, handwritten, stained, some crumpled at the edges, others folded so many times they had become soft to the touch. Each letter from someone who had been swallowed by the system, forgotten, punished without proof, condemned without a voice. He picked up the first one and held it in both hands like it was sacred. Then he spoke. "I didn't come here to charm you. I didn't come to perform." His voice was low but clear enough to silence every whisper in the chamber. "I came because this system has mastered the art of killing quietly, and I refuse to be quiet." Justice Barrett leaned forward slightly, her fingers clasped together. "Mr. Washington," she said with a practiced calm, "we respect your passion, but this is a legal forum." Denzel didn't look at her. He looked at the letter in his hand. "It's from a mother," he said. "Her son was 16, charged with resisting arrest after being tackled for jaywalking. He spent 3 weeks in juvenile lockup. On day 22, they found him hanging from a bedsheet." He looked up. His name was Malik, but the court transcript only called him subject. A ripple of discomfort passed through the room. Denzel placed the letter down. "I have 37 more." Amy shifted in her chair. "You've made your point, sir." "No," Denzel said calmly. "I haven't even started." He opened the next letter, and the next, and the next. Each one carried a name, a story, a verdict that didn't fit the crime, a sentence that outlived the truth. Some in the audience turned away. One senator rubbed his temples. A clerk looked like she might cry. But Amy, she stayed still, impassive, her expression frozen in that judicial half-smile that says everything and nothing. "The law is not driven by anecdotes," she said. "We must operate on precedent, on process." Denzel's gaze finally met hers. It wasn't anger in his eyes, it was mourning. Precedent is a luxury the dead don't get to challenge. Then for the first time, he stepped forward, past his table, past the microphone, into the center of the room. His voice never rose, but it hardened like steel. "You've built a courtroom where facts are filtered, pain is procedural, and humanity is an inconvenience. You don't see names, you see case numbers. You don't see children, you see liabilities." A long pause, the cameras kept rolling, but no one dared speak. "Do you know what justice looks like?" he asked. It looks like accountability. And accountability, he said, starts when the powerful are forced to listen, whether they want to or not. Amy folded her hands. Mr. Washington, I remind you, this is not a personal confrontation. He walked closer. His tone didn't change, but the silence around him deepened. Ma'am, he said quietly, if you've made a career out of sentencing the voiceless, then you don't get to decide when the volume gets uncomfortable. And with that, he placed the last letter down, right in front of her. She moved like someone used to being obeyed. Justice Amy Coney Barrett emerged from the side chamber in silence, her black robe trailing like a shadow stitched to marble. Her steps echoed as if the floor itself recognized who walked it. Not a strand of her hair out of place, not a twitch, not a flicker. Her face was unreadable. Years of hearings, verdicts, and defenses had turned her expression into a mask carved from ivory and certainty. She approached the center dais, adjusted the nameplate before her, then sat down with practiced precision. Her eyes scanned the room once, swift, calculating. Then she offered a single, small nod, just enough to imply, now you may begin. The chairman of the committee cleared his throat and leaned into the microphone. Mr. Washington, you've requested to speak before this panel on matters related to judicial equity and constitutional responsibility. You may begin your statement. Denzel didn't move at first. He just stared up at her. His silence made people shift in their chairs, unsure if something had gone wrong or if something was about to go very right. Then slowly he rose. No papers in hand, no script, just the weight of what he had already said and what he was about to. I was asked what I think is wrong with the legal system, he said, his voice calm, even. The question implies there's only one thing. That's generous. He reached down and opened the leather case at his side. Inside, time-worn folders, faded photographs, affidavits with smeared signatures, death certificates with boxes checked far too soon. He held one up, paper trembling slightly under the fluorescent lights. This, he said, is the conviction report for Elijah Brooks. 19 years old, sentenced to death based on one eyewitness, who later admitted he wasn't even sure it was Elijah. No retrial, no apology, just a needle in the arm and a box in the ground. He tossed the report onto the table with a flat slap that echoed through the room. Next came another. Maria Hernandez, accused of assaulting an officer. The footage showed the officer tripping over a trash can, but the judge said the video was inconclusive. She served 5 years. Her son entered foster care. He was dead within 6 months. Another slap of paper, a third, a fourth, a fifth. Each folder heavier than the last, not because of what they weighed, but because of what they carried. And then silence. Denzel scanned the room. You want to know what's wrong with the system? He asked. I didn't come to say it's broken. That would imply it was ever whole. I came to show you who's dying because of it. Amy didn't flinch. Her eyes didn't narrow, but something in the room tightened, like the walls themselves were beginning to lean in, listening, watching. A senator to Amy's left leaned into his mic. With all due respect, Mr. Washington, these are anecdotes. Emotional, yes, but not data. The system operates on law, precedent, procedure. Denzel's head tilted slightly. He smiled, but it wasn't amusement. It was disbelief, quiet and razor-sharp. You say anecdote, I say graveyard. You say procedure, I say machine. You say law, I say executioner dressed in Latin. He leaned forward, his palms resting on the wood. The problem isn't that the system fails. It's that it was built to work like this. Efficient, impersonal, lethal. Amy finally spoke. Her voice was low, controlled, almost clinical. You've made powerful emotional statements, Mr. Washington, but we cannot throw away centuries of jurisprudence because the outcomes make people uncomfortable. We are here to refine, not to burn it all down. Denzel didn't raise his voice. That would have been too easy. Instead, he walked toward the table again and took out a photograph, a small one, wrinkled at the edges. He held it up between 2 fingers. A boy, maybe 13, dark eyes, buzz cut, faint smile. This is Kevin. No criminal record. Pulled over because his taillight was out. They searched his backpack, found an unopened vape cartridge and a pocket knife, charged him as an adult. He hung himself 2 weeks later. He walked toward Amy's bench, every step louder than the last. He placed the photo right in front of her, face down. "I'm not here to burn your system down," he said quietly. "I'm here to light a candle in every courtroom you've kept in the dark." Amy looked down at the photo but didn't touch it. Denzel turned back to the room. His voice grew softer, dangerously so. The law was never supposed to be clean. It was supposed to be just. But somewhere along the way, you polished it until it stopped reflecting people and only reflected power. He pointed at the pile of files. "These aren't outliers, they're patterns." Then back to Amy. "And if you call this justice," he paused, "you don't need a bench, you need a mirror." No one applauded, no one blinked. Because for the first time in a courtroom full of laws, truth had taken the stand. There are moments when silence doesn't calm, it tightens. When the stillness in a room doesn't mean peace, it means pressure. And now it pressed down on every shoulder in that chamber. Amy Coney Barrett sat motionless behind her elevated desk. One hand rested over the other, fingers curled neatly. Her voice, when it came, was smooth but cold. The tone of someone who has heard too many appeals, too many tragedies, and learned how to armor herself in procedure. "Mr. Washington," she said, "the law is not perfect, but emotion cannot replace statute, no matter how compelling." Denzel didn't answer immediately. He took a single step forward, his shoes barely making a sound against the polished floor. His posture didn't shift, but something in his gaze darkened. It wasn't fury, it was ache, a slow, steady burn that had lived inside him too long to be called anger. "You say emotion can't replace law?" he asked. "Then tell that to the mother who watched her son tried as an adult at 14, because the officer said he looked dangerous." He reached into his coat and pulled out a printed transcript. Short, no more than 3 pages. He held it up without looking at it. "This is the full record of that hearing. It took less than 90 minutes to decide he'd be transferred to adult court. There was no evidence, no weapon, just fear, just his skin, just the way he didn't speak when spoken to." He laid the transcript flat on the table. He was found dead in his cell 3 days later, tied his bedsheet to a vent. "That wasn't part of your procedure either, was it?" Amy's jaw tensed slightly, just enough to be seen. "Mr. Washington, I understand your frustration, but we do not legislate based on individual grief. We are not here to process pain. We are here to uphold law." Denzel turned his head, slowly. Then he walked toward the center of the room. "No," he said, "that's exactly the problem. You're not here to process pain. You're here to process people." He stopped walking, standing directly beneath the raised bench where Amy sat. From this angle, the elevation looked less symbolic and more like separation. One person towering above another, unreachable, unaccountable. "And you've gotten really good at it," he continued. "You've built an entire system to ensure names become numbers, people become profiles, and humanity becomes a footnote." Amy sat back slightly. "We don't discuss individual cases at this forum. That's not the format. That's not how constitutional review functions." He looked up at her with something colder than contempt. "Clarity. That," he said, "is why your justice has no heart." The room gasped, not loud, but sharp, as if someone had opened a window and the cold truth had rushed in. Amy didn't blink, but her fingers curled tighter. One of the senators spoke up quickly, trying to diffuse the tension. "Mr. Washington, let's remember we're all here in pursuit of improvement, not indictment. We appreciate your passion, but personal attacks aren't productive." Denzel didn't look at him. He didn't need to. "I'm not attacking," he said softly. "I'm testifying." He stepped back toward his table and picked up another file, thinner than the others, a single page inside. He held it like it was a photograph of a ghost. "This is a ruling authored by your bench," he said, facing Amy, "where a judge claimed the defendant's emotional instability was reason enough to deny bail. The defendant was a teenage girl, assault victim, diagnosed PTSD. Her bail was denied for being too upset." He set the file down with painful care. You call that law. I call it punishment for surviving. Amy folded her hands tighter. Do you know what that girl did after 2 months in holding? He asked. She stopped eating. When she fainted in the shower, the staff assumed she was faking it. She died 5 hours later. Amy finally replied, That decision wasn't mine. No, Denzel said, but the precedent was, and precedent is a loaded gun, even if you don't pull the trigger yourself. A chill spread through the chamber, not from temperature, from recognition. Every official in that room had defended the system at some point, but none of them had ever been forced to feel what it produced. Not like this. Amy straightened her back. Her voice hardened. Are you suggesting we abandon objectivity? That we replace law with outrage? That we let grief dictate governance? Denzel stepped forward one last time. I'm suggesting that if the law can't survive empathy, it was never built to serve justice, only power. He walked up to the line just beneath her bench. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't tremble. He just stood there and looked her dead in the eyes. You want to know what emotion really threatens your system? He asked. It's not anger, it's compassion. Because compassion forces accountability. And accountability? That's the one thing your courtroom never prepares for. And with that, he turned, walked back to his seat and sat down. Behind him, the silence roared louder than any gavel. Her voice cut through the chamber like a blade. You're an actor, Mr. Washington, Amy snapped, her tone now stripped of its usual restraint. This is the law, not Hollywood. We don't need monologues. We need order. There it was. The mask cracked. Every eye turned toward her. She realized it too late. The tight-lipped control she had worn like armor for hours was gone. All that remained was thinly veiled irritation, and it echoed louder than any shout. Denzel didn't move. He stood there, still, silent, not defensive, not shocked, just still. A silence so heavy it made the microphones feel like they had died. The static disappeared. The cameras stopped whirring. It was the kind of silence that made people wait, because they knew what was coming next would not be small. He stepped forward, not rushed, not theatrical, just deliberate. 1 step, 2. Then he stopped, feet planted directly before the elevated bench, eyes lifted but unwavering. He didn't look up at power. He looked through it. The entire room leaned forward without knowing it. I've played a lot of roles, he said, voice low, steady. I've portrayed killers, cops, slaves, presidents, men wrongfully accused, men righteously convicted. He paused, let the weight of his resume hover in the air. Then with no ceremony, no performance, he dropped it all. But I've never seen justice delivered without blood and tears, because real justice costs. Amy shifted slightly, crossing her legs beneath the robe. She didn't reply. Couldn't, maybe. You think I'm acting? Denzel continued, one brow barely raised. You think this is a show? He pointed behind him, to the files, to the names, to the faded letters and wrinkled photos now scattered across the table like evidence in a crime no one wanted to solve. This isn't performance. This is post-mortem. Another pause. He took a breath. Not to calm himself, but to control the fire carefully burning beneath each word. You sit up there in silence and robes. You call it impartiality. But what it really is distance. He pointed to the floor beneath his feet. I walk here, down here, where the verdicts land, where the doors slam shut, where mothers scream behind plexiglass, and kids learn the law by counting how many years they're about to lose. Amy opened her mouth, but no sound came. So he gave her one more truth. You live in a courtroom. I live in a graveyard. Now the tension wasn't rising. It was already there, coiled, ticking. Amy's composure buckled further. You're here to insult a justice of the Supreme Court? No, he said. I'm here to remind you what justice looks like when it's not hidden behind Latin, leather chairs, and security clearances. His voice remained controlled, but now it burned. I've attended more funerals than red carpets. I've seen caskets too small for the names inside them. And every time I've wondered, what courtroom failed this one? Who sat behind a bench and thought, it's just another case? Who called that pain not relevant? He looked her straight in the eyes. You did. Amy's fingers tapped the desk once. Sharp, unconscious. It was the tick of someone cornered by something they couldn't refute. "This is inflammatory," she said. "Personal, irresponsible." Denzel tilted his head. "So is death, but it keeps showing up in your docket." A hushed voice from the back whispered, "My God." He turned to the room now, his voice expanding. Not louder, just deeper, like something eternal had slipped beneath the surface. "You're not upset because I'm acting," he said. "You're upset because I'm not. You're used to speeches you can ignore, phrases that die in the transcript. You're used to the noise of grief that gets labeled irrelevant." He looked back to her one last time. "You thought I came to play a role. I didn't. I came to bury one." That line hung in the air like a final note in a requiem. Amy said nothing. She couldn't, because in a room built to protect comfort from consequence, a man had just stood up and introduced both, and neither were leaving. Amy's breath had grown shallow, clipped at the edges. She leaned forward just enough to assert dominance, just enough to forget she was already losing it. "You are abusing your speaking privilege, Mr. Washington," she said, voice brittle beneath its polish. "If you can't control your words, we will end this hearing." Denzel didn't flinch. He stood motionless for half a second, but it wasn't hesitation. It was precision. He was choosing his next words like a surgeon reaching for a scalpel, not to wound, but to expose. His fists curled at his sides, knuckles taut, not from rage, but from restraint. Then he stepped forward, one pace, until he stood dead center beneath her, where the law had elevated her above him, but morality had not. He looked up, and when he spoke, it was not a shout. It was a sentence, a ruling, a reckoning. "Shut your mouth." 3 words, not loud, but loud enough to rupture the walls of decorum. Every seat creaked as people stiffened. One hand froze halfway through jotting notes. A camera panned involuntarily toward Amy's face. No one exhaled. Denzel's voice dropped even lower, but every syllable slammed like a courtroom gavel wrapped in thunder. "If all you have left are excuses to defend a system that kills poor children while calling itself fair, then you don't deserve to speak in the name of justice." The silence afterward wasn't just awkward. It was sacred. Not a whisper, not a cough. Even the air seemed to hold itself still. Amy's face twitched, barely, but enough. Her mouth parted as if to fire back, but no sound came. Her gaze, for the first time that day, broke contact. Because in that moment, she wasn't a justice. She was just another witness, and she had been seen. Denzel didn't gloat. He didn't move. He didn't fill the silence with more. He didn't have to, because the truth doesn't need applause to echo. Behind him, the senators sat frozen. A few looked down at their papers, not reading, just avoiding. One clerk closed her laptop slowly, as if afraid even keystrokes might offend the moment. The cameras kept rolling, now locked in a steady, trembling zoom on Amy's expression. 1,000 television screens across the country captured it, her chin lifted, her eyes searching for a comeback, but finding only her own reflection staring back through Denzel's words. It wasn't a man attacking her. It was the sum of every voice she'd ignored. "You don't understand the weight of your silence," Denzel continued, his voice softer now but sharper. "Every time you reduce a child's cry to irrelevant, you sign a verdict with invisible ink. And that ink stains every courtroom you touch." Amy sat back, but her posture had lost its conviction. Her hands, so tightly folded before, now lay apart, open, uncertain. She blinked once, twice, then held still, as though movement would shatter what remained of her authority. A reporter in the back clicked a pen by accident. The noise startled everyone. Still, Denzel didn't sit. He turned to the room, not to the bench, not to the cameras, but to the people, the real courtroom, the real jury, and he said, "You want to talk about order? Order doesn't mean silence. Order doesn't mean compliance. Order doesn't mean kneeling before a system just because it was here before us." He pointed again at the stack of cases behind him. "True order," he said, "means every scream, every plea, every broken voice gets heard, even if it cracks the walls of this chamber." Then he looked down, then up, then directly at her. You asked me to control my words. I did. And I used them to bury your pretense with three. He stepped back, not with swagger, with gravity. Justice hadn't been performed. It had been pronounced. And it came not from a bench, but from a man with nothing to gain, except the truth. Amy didn't speak for the rest of the hearing. She didn't need to, because by then, everyone had already heard what mattered, and it didn't come from her. It started with a single clip, 38 seconds, shaky phone footage from a congressional staffer sitting in the back row. It captured the moment Denzel Washington said it. Shut your mouth. 3 words delivered without theatrics, but heavy enough to shake the pillars of a system built on performance. By midnight, it had been uploaded to X, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and a dozen fringe blogs with opposite agendas, but the same obsession. 38 seconds. And within 24 hours, it had ignited something that could no longer be contained by the walls of a courtroom. CNN's banner headline read, "Washington delivers scorching indictment of judicial system, a moment of moral clarity." Fox News countered with, "Denzel's meltdown, actor abuses government hearing to push anti-court agenda." But no media outlet could shape it fast enough, because the people had already done it for them. Clips flooded every timeline, the dead silence in the chamber, Amy's frozen stare, the way Denzel didn't blink when truth cut through privilege. It wasn't viral because it was explosive. It was viral because it was real, unfiltered, unrehearsed, undeniable. Across social media, hashtags stormed the top trends. # shut your mouth, # justice, awake # not another case. A high school teacher in Milwaukee paused her civics class to play the video. A retired judge in Oregon wrote a public essay titled, "The Moment We Were Seen." A grieving mother in New Orleans uploaded her own clip, tearfully holding the verdict that had sent her son to prison for stealing a backpack. She whispered into the camera, "He said what I've screamed in silence for 5 years." In neighborhoods that had never known justice as anything more than a door slammed shut, Denzel's words were printed on handmade signs, posted outside community centers, spray painted beside murals of the fallen. But it wasn't just the poor who heard him. It was the tired, the disillusioned, the ones who had stopped believing anything would ever change. And suddenly, change didn't seem like a theory anymore. In Washington, reporters swarmed outside the Capitol steps, demanding comment from Amy Coney Barrett. She offered none. A spokesperson released a 3-line statement that said, "Justice Barrett remains committed to judicial integrity. She will not dignify personal attacks with further engagement." But the silence said more than the statement ever could. For once, a Supreme Court justice looked human, not broken, but cracked. Meanwhile, Denzel vanished. No press tour, no interviews. He didn't tweet, didn't issue clarifications, didn't ask to trend. He had said what needed to be said and left the rest to echo, and it echoed. College debate teams used the clip to dissect systemic bias. Churches played it during sermons about courage and confrontation. One pastor in Detroit, his voice trembling, told his congregation, "He didn't speak for the cameras. He spoke for the caskets, and some truths don't need permission to be heard." On cable panels, experts debated the appropriateness of Denzel's conduct. But every time someone said, "He went too far," the public answered, "No, he finally went where no one dared." The justice system, long protected by robes and reverence, felt the heat. Not the fire of riots or unrest, but something deeper, a moral audit. Law schools across the country reported spontaneous student forums erupting on campus, sparked by the question, what does justice look like when the law loses its soul? Even some within the courts began to stir. A sitting district judge in California quietly resigned. In his letter, he quoted Denzel, "If you defend a system that kills quietly, you're not a judge. You're a silence wearing a robe." And through all of it, the image that endured wasn't Denzel shouting. It was him staring, still, unmoved, looking up, not with anger, but with accountability, at a woman seated above him, not attacking her, but unveiling her, not condemning a person, but confronting a pattern. A moment that told the country, justice isn't about who sits highest in the room. It's about who stands for the ones no one else will. And in homes, classrooms, courtrooms, churches, and streets, people repeated the line not as a threat, but as a warning to every institution that had mistaken silence for compliance. Shut your mouth if you've got nothing but excuses left. That was the verdict, and it didn't need a judge to make it real. 1 week later, no stage, no microphones, no broadcast trucks lined the streets. The marble walls of Capitol Hill had faded into background noise. There were no gavels to pound, no judges to preside, no panels demanding order. Only people. The community church was small, tucked between a closed laundromat and a boarded-up deli, its front sign missing half its letters. But that Sunday, it was full, standing room only, folding chairs packed shoulder to shoulder. The air was thick with warmth and grief, memory and defiance. At the front of the sanctuary, a row of framed photographs rested on a long table. Some glossy and formal, others printed on home printers, edges curling from time and tears. Under each, a name, a date, a story cut short. The gathering wasn't billed as a memorial. It was called a vigil of names. Not a eulogy for the past, but a reckoning with the present. Denzel sat in the third row. No fanfare, no entourage. Just a man in a dark jacket, his hands folded, his head bowed. He hadn't come to speak. He'd done that already. Now he was here to listen. A video projector flickered on. Static, then sound. A grainy recording began to play. A voicemail from a mother who lost her son to a wrongful conviction. Her voice cracked, not from drama, but from years of carrying a scream that no one wanted to hear. He wasn't perfect, but he was mine. And the system took him before it even tried to understand him. A soft murmur swept the room. Some wept, some clenched their hands. Then came another recording, a handwritten letter, read aloud by a local teacher, written by a boy who'd been released after 6 years in prison for a crime, later proven false. When I got out, I didn't know how to cross the street anymore. I forgot how to be free. Then came another, and another. The screen dimmed, and a slideshow took over. Photos of faces too young for tombstones, too kind for sentencing sheets. No applause, no commentary, only silence. And the weight of truth finally given a microphone. And still Denzel didn't speak. Not until a small voice broke the silence. A boy, no older than 7, stood at the end of the aisle, holding the hand of an older woman. His eyes locked onto Denzel's like he'd been watching him the entire time. He walked up slowly, tugged at Denzel's coat, whispered, "Are you a hero?" The room held its breath. Even the walls seemed to lean in. Denzel turned, looked at the boy. Then he crouched down, not to match the height, but to match the honesty. "No," he said, voice soft, almost broken. "I'm not a hero." He glanced at the altar. The names, the candles flickering beneath photos that should have grown old but never got the chance. "I'm just someone who couldn't stay quiet when too many were forced to." The boy nodded, like he understood more than a child should ever have to. And that was it. Denzel didn't climb the pulpit, didn't issue final words or dramatic closures, because this wasn't about him. It never was. He stood, walked to the front table, ran his hand lightly across a photo, one of the boys he'd spoken about in the hearing. A name carved now into murals, remembered not as a statistic, but as someone who mattered. Then quietly, Denzel lit a candle. The flame caught slowly, then stood tall, defiant against the stillness around it. He stepped back and let it burn. Outside the church, the wind stirred. The world went on. Politicians resumed their arguments. News cycles moved to the next controversy. But something had shifted, not in the system, not yet, but in the people. In every mother who refused to lower her voice. In every teacher who played that courtroom clip before a lesson on justice. In every child who now understood that truth doesn't require permission to speak. It only requires someone brave enough not to flinch. Denzel walked out without saying goodbye. Because some farewells aren't endings. They're beginnings dressed in silence. And justice, real justice, rarely announces itself with trumpets. Sometimes it starts with 3 words and ends with one small candle, still burning. Justice is not a robe, a bench, or a title. It's a choice made quietly, daily, in moments when we decide to listen rather than look away. Denzel didn't speak to glorify rebellion. He spoke to awaken responsibility. Because silence may feel safe, but it's the soil where injustice grows best. If truth makes us uncomfortable, it's not because it's wrong, but because it's real. And when someone dares to break that silence, we don't need to worship them. We only need to follow their courage and refuse to be quiet when others are forced to be. If this story shook you, don't just scroll, hit like. Share it with someone who still believes that truth matters more than titles. And subscribe to Justice Unscripted, where silence gets confronted and power gets questioned. Turn on the bell, because the next story won't be safe. It won't be easy, but it will be necessary. Now it's your turn. What part of this story stayed with you? Drop it in the comments. Let the world know you heard it. And more importantly, you felt it. This dramatized account was born from real pain, real injustice, and one unshakable idea. That courage isn't always loud, but it's never silent. Thanks for watching. And remember, justice isn't handed down. It's spoken up. This is Justice Unscripted.